Hey guys, today I'm going to walk you through a very simple and inexpensive setup that I use to shoot many of my thumbnail images, and I actually shoot quite a bit of B-roll with it too. So yeah, let's get right to it. Okay, so this is it. This is basically the whole setup behind me. It's really comprised of 4 elements. First, we have this foam core board, which I use to just create my shooting surface and use the stuff for reflecting and bouncing light around. And then it's basically a light stand, a light, and an umbrella. And it's a very efficient, effective kit for doing these thumbnails, or like I said, B-roll. And I use the same lighting setup to light all my videos. So me, talking head, that's the stuff I'm using. And this whole setup, it's less than $200. So really cheap, versatile setup. Okay, so to shoot pictures today, I'm going to use my Canon 80D. It's a really good SLR, has great autofocus. It's not a very expensive camera. And I'm going to use this nifty 50, this 50mm lens from Canon. I like this lens a lot. It's very inexpensive, but it's super sharp. It's just a really super sharp lens, and it has great depth of field, which I like as well. So that's why I'm choosing that guy. Okay, so I've taken a few test shots and things are looking pretty good. Now, I'm shooting with manual exposure, and the reason I'm doing that is because this light is static, the setup is static, so once I have my settings as I like them, I can just keep shooting, I can recompose, and things won't change. Also, the light I'm using is a tungsten white balance, so you have to really make sure that you're setting your white balance appropriately. So this is the foam core board I was talking about earlier. It's really cheap. You could probably get it for around $1 or $2 at any art supply or office supply store. And the reason why I like this stuff is it's so useful in a variety of ways. So I can use it as a shooting surface, I can use it to block light, I can use it to reflect light, and you know, white just looks great, right? So I put a nice colorful object on there, or a nice contrasty object, and it just looks awesome. As an alternative to that, I use these colored cardboards a lot too. And they're also really cheap and plentiful. And if you just, you want to mix up your background or mix up your foreground, these are a great way to do it to get a lot of different looks. So the reason I set up in this 3-sided configuration is I want a really nice, even wrapping light all around my subject. The great part about using this stuff is you can configure it any which way you want. And I find the best way to do that is just experiment, add pieces, remove pieces, and just see what you can come up with. So I'm using an umbrella today because I want a really soft wrapping light. I take the umbrella away and I create a totally different look. I get really deep shadows and hard edges. Now, umbrellas are just a great thing to have in your photography or video toolkit. They're cheap. This is a 4-foot umbrella and it's only about 15 bucks. So the last piece of the puzzle is my light here. And it's a Lowell Total light. It's very inexpensive, ranging from about $90 to $140. And it kicks off a really nice quality of light, a good amount of light. I think the only downside is they run really, really hot, so you have to be careful when handling it. And of course, for your light, you're gonna need a light stand. They're quite cheap. You can get a decent quality one for about 30 bucks. Well, I think I have enough good shots, so let's jump out to the computer and I'll take you through my basic process of creating thumbnails. Okay, I've dumped all the pictures on my Mac and I've loaded them into Digital Photo Professional. This is a good piece of software from Canon for working with raw images, and it comes free with Canon DSLR. There's lots of good options for processing raw images, but I just prefer to use this one. So rather than boring you with me skimming through all these images and picking the best ones, I've already done that, so let me just sort it here by rating. Now these first two images, they give you a really good example as to the difference an umbrella makes in your lighting. So the image on the left here, I'm just using the bare light, and you can see, yeah, really hard pronounced shadow. And the image on the right here, you can still see a shadow, but it's very subtle and the light is very soft. But I'm not going to use either of these two images. I'm going to use this third one here on the yellow background. I like the image, but it's a little bit dark for my taste and definitely needs more pop. So I need to make a few corrections. So I'm going to bring up my tool palette here. Now I shot it with a neutral picture style, which is really flat. So first thing I'm going to do is switch that over to standard, which you can see right away gives it a lot more contrast and saturation. Now I want to boost the brightness a little bit here too as well. I really like my images quite bright, very eye-catching. And final couple adjustments I'm going to do is just add a little bit more saturation and a touch more contrast. So to my eye, that looks good. And so now I will export it as a high quality TIFF file. Okay, so here's the TIFF file. I'm just gonna drag that into Affinity Photo for my final edits. Now, if you haven't heard of Affinity Photo, it's essentially the same as Adobe's Photoshop, but at a fraction of the price. It costs about $50 US, one time, no subscription. It's just an excellent piece of software and I highly recommend it. So I'll put a link in the description if you guys wanna check that out. Now, first thing I need to do is resize my document. My final image size for my thumbnails is 1280 by 720. So I start off by getting it down to 1920 by 1080. So I need to do a bit of a crop here, 1080, and just position this where I want it. That looks pretty good. And just a couple more adjustments. I'm going to boost up the saturation a bit more. I'm going to add some vibrance, and then I'll put a curve on here to make it just ridiculously contrasty. And that's kind of how I like my images. I like them very colorful. I like them very bright, very saturated. So they're just really, really eye-catching. So final thing to do is add some text. And I'll just say best drone ever, question mark. And I'll select that. I'm gonna change the font. I like this guy here. Make it bold, and we need to increase the size. So that might be a bit too big. Maybe I'll make it 60. Okay, so I'm gonna just reduce the gap between lines. And I think I'll also just kind of stretch it out here a little bit. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And then the final thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to duplicate that text layer. And I'm going to select it, and I'm going to change the color to match the color of the shadow coming off the spark. So I need to change that position. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag that out so it looks like there's kind of a shadow coming off my text, just to give it, I guess, a bit more interest. Okay, and that's maybe a bit too dark, so I'll just bring down the opacity a bit. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. So we can export it at our final size of 1280 by 720. Just throw that on the desktop. And there we go. There's our thumbnail image. I think that looks pretty good.
Well, that's it for this one, guys, and I hope that goes to show you that you don't need a lot of really expensive, fancy gear to make great thumbnail images for your YouTube videos. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.